Chapter 6. The Race. Now they began a desperate race, the machines against the foxes. In the beginning, the hill looked like this. After about an hour, as the machine spit away more and more soil from the hilltop, it looked like this. Sometimes the foxes would gain a little ground, and the clanking noises would grow fainter, and Mr. Fox would say, "We're going to make it." "I'm sure we are." But then, a few moments later, the machines would come back at them, and the crunch of the mighty shovels would get louder and louder. Once the foxes actually saw the sharp metal edge of one of the shovels as it scraped up the earth just behind them. "Keep going, my darlings," panted Mr. Fox. "Don't give up." "Keep going," said Fat Bogus, shouted to Bunce and Bean. "We'll give any moment now." "Have you caught sight of him yet?" Bean called back. "Not yet," shouted Bogus, "but I think you're close." "I'll pick him up with my blanket," shouted Bunce. "I'll chop him to pieces." But by lunchtime, the machines were still at it, and so were the poor foxes. The hill now looked like this. The farmers didn't stop for lunch. They were too keen to finish the job. "Hey, Mr. Fox," yelled Bunce, leaning out of his tractor. "We're coming to get you now." "You've had your last chicken," yelled Bogus. "You'll never come prowling around my farm again." Also, madness had taken hold of the three men. The tall, skinny Bean and the dwarfish, pot-bellied Bunce were driving their machines like maniacs, racing the motors and making the shovels dig at a terrific speed. The fat Bogus was hopping about like a dervish and shouting, "Faster, faster!" By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, this is what had happened to the hill. It looks more like some sort of valley or something. The hole the machines had dug was like the crater of a volcano. It was such an extraordinary sight that crowds of people came rushing out from the surrounding villages to have a look. They stood on the edge of the crater and stared down at Bogus and Bunce and Bean. "Hey there, Bogus, what's going on?" "We're after our fox." "You must be mad." The beavers jeered and laughed, but this only made the three farmers more furious and more obstinate and more determined than ever to not give up until they had caught the fox. Chapter 7. We'll Never Let Him Go. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Bean switched off the motor of his tractor and climbed down from the driver's seat. Bunce did the same. Both men had had enough. They were tired and stiff from driving tractors all day. They were also hungry. Slowly, they walked over to the small fox's hole in the bottom of the large crater. Bean's face was purple with rage. Bunce was cursing the fox with dirty words that cannot be printed. Bogus came wadding up. "Damn, blast the filthy, stinky fox," he said. "What the heck are we gonna do now?" "I'll tell you what we don't do," Bean said. "We don't let him go." "We'll never let him go," declared Bunce. "Never, never, never," cried Bogus. "Did you hear that, Mr. Fox?" yelled Bean, bending low and shouting down the hole. "It's not over yet, Mr. Fox. We're not going home till we've strung you up dead as a dingbat." Whereupon the three men all shook hands with one another and swore a solemn oath that they would not go back to their farms until the fox was caught. "What's the next move?" asked Bunce, the pot-bellied dwarf. "We're sending you down the hole to fetch them up," said Bean. "Down you go, you miserable midget." "Not me!" screamed Bunce, running away. Bean made a sickly smile. When he smiled, you saw his scarlet gums. You saw more gums than teeth. "And there's only one thing to do," he said. "We starve him out. We camp here day and night watching the hole. He'll come out in the end. He'll have to." So Bogus and Bunce and Bean sent messages down to their farms asking for tents, sleeping bags, and supper. Chapter 8. The foxes began to starve. That evening, 3 tents were put up in the crater on the hill, one for Bogus, one for Bunce, and one for Bean. The tents surrounded Mr. Fox's hole, and the 3 farmers sat outside their farms eating their supper. Bogus had 3 boiled chickens smaller than dumplings, Bunce had 6 stones filled with disgusting goose liver paste, and Bean had 2 gallons of cider. All 3 of them kept their guns beside them. Bogus picked up a steaming chicken and held it close to the fox's hole. "Can you smell this, Mr. Fox?" he shouted. "Lovely tender chicken. Want to come up and get it?" The rich scent of chicken wafted down the tunnel to where the foxes were crouching. "Oh, Dad," said one of the small foxes, "couldn't we just sneak up and snatch out of his hand?" "Don't you dare," said Mr. Fox. "That's just what they want you to do." "But we're so hungry," they cried. "How long will it be till we get something to eat?" Their mother didn't answer them, nor did their father. They had no answer to give. As darkness fell, Bunce and Bean switched on the powerful headlamps of the 2 tractors and shone them on the hole. "Now," said Bean, "we'll take it in turn to keep watch. One watches while 2 sleep, and so on all through the night." Bogus said, "What if the fox digs the hole right through the hill and comes out on the other side? You didn't think of that one, did you?" "Of course I did," said Bean, pretending he had. "Go on then, tell us the answer," said Bogus. Bean picked something small and black out of his ear and flicked it away. "How many men have you working on your farm?" 35, Bogus said. "I got 36, Bunce said. "I've got 37, Bean said. "That makes 108 men altogether. We must order them to surround the hill. Each man will have a gun and flashlight. There will be no escape then for Mr. Fox." So the order went down to the farms, and that night 108 people formed a tight ring around the bottom of the hill. They were armed with sticks and guns and hatchets and pistols and all sorts of other horrible weapons. This made it quite impossible for a fox, or indeed any other animal, to escape from the hill. The next day, the watching and waiting went on. Bogus and Bunce and Bean sat upon small stools, staring at the fox's hole. They didn't talk much. They just sat there with a gun on their lap. Every so often, Mr. Fox would creep a little closer toward the mouth of the tunnel, take a sniff. Then he would creep back down and say, "They're still there." "Are you sure?" Mrs. Fox would ask. "Positive," said Mr. Fox. "I can smell that man Bean a mile away. He stinks." Chapter 9. Mr. Fox has a plan. For 3 days and 3 nights this waiting game went on. "How long can a fox go without food or water?" Bogus asked on the 3rd day. "Not much longer now," Bean told him. "He'll make a run for it soon. He'll have to." Bean was right. Down in the tunnels, the foxes were slowly but surely starving to death. "If only we could have just a tiny sip of water," said one of the small foxes. "Oh, Dad, couldn't you do something?" "Couldn't we make a dash for it, Dad? We'll have a bit of chance, won't we?" "No chance at all," snapped Mrs. Fox. "I refuse to let you go up there and face those guns. I'd sooner you stay down here and die in peace." Mr. Fox had not spoken in a long time. He had been sitting quite still, his eyes closed, not even hearing what the others were saying. Mrs. Fox knew that he was desperately trying to think of a way out. And now, as she looked at him, he saw him stir himself and get slowly to his feet. He looked back at his wife. There was a little spark of excitement dancing in his eyes. "What is it, darling?" said Mrs. Fox quickly. "I've just had a bit of an idea," Mr. Fox said carefully. "What?" they cried. "Oh, Dad, what is it?" "Come on," said Mrs. Fox. "Tell us quickly." "Well," said Mr. Fox. Then he stopped and sighed and shook his head. He sat down again. "It's no good," he said. "Won't work after all." "Why not, Dad?" "Because it means more digging, and we aren't any of us strong enough for that after 3 days of nights without food." "Yes, we are, Dad," cried the small foxes, jumping up and down, running to their father. "We can do it. You see if we can't, so can you." Mr. Fox looked at the 4 small foxes and he smiled. "What fine children I have," he thought. They are starving to death and haven't had a drink for 3 days, but they are still undefeated. I must not let them down. I suppose we could give it a try, he said. Let's go, Dad. Tell us what you want us to do. Slowly, Mrs. Fox got to her feet. She was suffering more than any of them from lack of food and water. She was very weak. I'm so sorry, she said, but I don't think I'm going to be much help. You stay right where you are, my darling, said Mr. Fox. We can handle this ourselves. Chapter 10. August's Chicken House number 1. This time we must go in a very special direction, said Mr. Fox, pointing sideways and downward. So he and his 4 children began to dig once again. The work went much more slowly now, yet they kept at it with great courage. And little by little the tunnel began to grow. Dad, I wish you would tell us where we were going, said one of the children. I dare not to do that, Mr. Fox, because this place I'm hoping to get to is so marvelous that if I describe it to you now, you will go crazy with excitement. And then, if we fail to get there, which is very possible, you will die of disappointment. I don't want you to raise your hopes too high, my darlings. For a long, long time, they kept on digging. For how long did not go? No, because there was no days and no nights down there in the murky tunnel. But at last Mr. Fox gave the order to stop. I think, he said, we had better to take a peep upstairs now and see where we are. I know where I want to be, but I can't possibly be sure we're anywhere near it. Slowly, warily, the foxes began to slope the tunnel upward toward the tunnel surface. Up and up it went. And suddenly they came to something hard above their heads, and they couldn't go up any further. Mr. Fox reached up to examine the hard thing. It's wood, he whispered. Wooden planks. What does that mean, Dad? It means, unless I'm very much mistaken, that we are right underneath someone's house, whispered Mr. Fox. Now be quiet now while I take a look. Carefully, Mr. Fox began pushing up one of the floorboards. The board creaked most terribly and they all ducked down, waiting for something awful to happen. Nothing did, so Mr. Fox pushed up a second board, and then, very, very cautiously, he poked his head up through the gap. He got a shriek of excitement. I've done it, he yelled. I've done it! First time! I've done it! I've done it! He pulled himself up through the gap in the floor and started prancing and dancing with joy. Up, come up, he sang out. Come up and see where you are, my darlings. What a sight for a hungry fox. Hallelujah! Hooray! Hooray! The 4 foxes scrambled up out of the tunnel, and what a fantastic sight it was now that met their eyes. They were in a large shed, and the whole place was teeming with chickens. There are white chickens and brown chickens and black chickens by the thousand. August's Chicken House number 1, cried Mr. Fox. It's exactly what I was aiming at. I hit it slap in the middle. First time! Isn't that fantastic? And, if I may say so, rather clever. The small foxes went wild with excitement. They started running around in all directions, chasing the stupid chickens. Wait, ordered Mr. Fox. Don't lose your heads. Stand back, calm down, do this properly. First of all, everyone have a drink of water. They all ran over to the chicken's drinking straw and lapped up the lovely cool water. Then Mr. Fox chose 3 of the plumpest chickens, and with a clever flick of his jaws, he killed them instantly. Back to the tunnel, he ordered. Come on. No fooling about. The quicker you move, the quicker you shall have something to eat. One after another, they climbed down through the hole in the ground, and soon they were all standing once again in the dark tunnel. Mr. Fox reached up and pulled the floorboards back into place. He did this with great care. He did this so that no one could tell that it had ever been moved. My son, he said, giving the 3 plump hens to the biggest of his 4 children. Run back with these to your mother. Tell her to prepare a feast. Tell her that the rest of us will be along in jiffy as soon as we have made a few other little arrangements.